and we're going to start it off with recruiting. Spring has officially ended, Jordan, and this is kind of the dead period, if you will, for college football. Spring practice is over. You got the, I guess, the excitement or the anxiety of the spring portal that officially opened today. So obviously, there's teams out there losing players, depth pieces, so on and so forth, and obviously some teams out there looking for pieces that they have identified that they are missing now that the portal or now that the spring is closed. But the one thing that keeps us throughout the offseason, Jordan, is the constant ebbs and flows of the recruiting cycle. And this 2026 class has certainly been sort of a special class so far for the Clemson Tigers. We remember that elite retreat weekend that came through and eventually, I think, had 8 recruits from that weekend commit to the Tigers verbally. So what is new along the recruiting trail for this 2026 class, Jordan? And what should fans be paying attention to for the people that don't follow recruiting so closely?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of teed it up really well. I think this class has, come together really, really nicely. There's still some big pieces, some big fish still out there on the board that Clemson is very much in it for. But I think one position that we haven't really talked a ton about is linebacker. I feel like that's probably the position that hasn't taken the shape that we all, maybe expected it to be. It doesn't mean that they're not, in it for guys, but they are. It's the board is not nearly as solidified. Of course, you have the big fish, the linebacker Tyler Atkinson from Georgia, who Clemson is very much, hoping they can land. But that's going to be an uphill battle, and that's one of the big boy recruiting battles that it's going to be tough to win. He's going to drive a high asking price, and he's going to take his visits into the summer. So it's going to be a battle. So you got to just kind of sit back and wait and see how the chips fall there. Really, the one linebacker recruit that I think has really been consistent in terms of where Clemson's radar is linebacker Caleb Gordon from Ashbrook up here in Gastonia, North Carolina, so not too far up the road from me. He's a kid that kind of has been. I think he's slightly under recruited. I mean, he's 3-star guy, not he's not one of the blue chip guys that everyone is talking about, but I think he's a guy that plays really, really sound football. He's not like an overly athletically gifted type of player, but he's the type of linebacker that I think Clemson has done traditionally well with, and I think would fit well in this group. So, and he's a guy that has been very vocal about his affinity for Clemson. So, I think that's a guy to keep an eye out on as we continue to go into these spring and summer visits. He's definitely one of the guys that I think could be close to pulling the trigger. We will see. But, that group in general has not really, like I said, the board hasn't really taken shape the way that, some of the other ones have. So, it's probably a consequence of having a new staff, new defensive coordinator, and a new linebacker coach. And you've seen, Ben Boulware kind of get his feet under him on the recruiting trail. So I think that's a position group to kind of keep an eye out on because, I'm not in concern territory, but there is definitely a considerable difference in kind of how the board has shaken out at that position group compared to everything else. So keep an eye on that. What do you kind of think about that?
Yeah, linebacker is definitely one of those rooms that, need to round into shape. And I think part of that is Ben Boulware and his, him just trying to kind of learn a lot right now. We all know who Ben Boulware was as a player, probably one of the most intense and high energy, just effort guys that have ever played the linebacker position at Clemson, and truly a Clemson guy through and through. He grew up a Clemson fan. He always wanted to play for Clemson, and when he got the opportunity, he certainly made the most of it. But at the end of the day, he is very early on and he is very young in his coaching career and he still has a lot to learn. But I think the one saving grace and the one good thing that Clemson fans need to keep in mind is he's got a guy in Tom Allen that he can go to and he can lean on, a guy that has so much experience all the way from the high school level to a head coach at the highest levels of college football. And now the DC at Clemson. So he's got a ton of experience to lean on there. Not only Dabo as a recruiter as well. We all know Dabo's the closer for Clemson and always has been. But I think you just got to give Ben Boulware some time to kind of solidify his routine as far as recruiting goes for him. He's got to figure out what works for him, what his pitch sounds like, how he relates to guys on the recruiting trail. How he goes in there and establish relationships within those various high schools that he's going into and trying to recruit guys. It's all a learning experience. I don't think we should be alarmed in any way. I think he'll figure it out. And I got all the confidence in the world because he's a guy that is relentless in his preparation. He was as a player, so I assume that's exactly how he's going to be of a coach. That's what he demands of his players that are already in the room. You've heard the linebackers talk about it, and I think it'll eventually translate to the recruiting trail as he hones in kind of his Clemson pitch and what works for him and learns how to connect with some of these younger players coming out of high school because that's a bit different, right? And he's an intense guy and he's not everybody's cup of tea probably all the time, so he's got to learn how to balance himself and then learn how to relate to some of those younger players.
100%. And, I think that is going to be the key for him. When you have a guy that's young and, green in the role. It's, some Clemson fans will probably have some criticism and kind of harken it back to, some of the previous inexperienced hires that Clemson has made over the years,
right.
Especially recently.
Yes.
But I don't view this in the same light simply because I think he's just has a much better support system around him. He has an experienced defensive coaching staff around him.
Yes.
Where you're in a position where you can, take a flyer and make that kind of hire.
Well, and it kind of lines up perfectly because Tom Allen's not a position coach anywhere on the team. So he kind of has that flexibility. Like you can afford to have that one young staff member on your defensive staff, right? Because you have so much experience everywhere else on the defense. Look at the defensive line coaches. Look at all the experience they have. Look at your secondary coaches. Look at all the experience they have. And then you have this defensive coordinator that has 20 plus years of experience being a head coach, being a defensive coordinator, and at all levels of football. So I think it's, to your point, it's a lot. The circumstances around it are a lot different than maybe previous young hires that Dabo has made, and maybe too many at once. So,
100%. And so, like I said, I'm not in concern territory, and certainly the rest of this class coming together the way it has definitely lets you're like, okay, well, if we don't have like 2, 3, 4, or 5 stars linebacker commits at the end of the class, it's not going to be the end of the world. So that's just one thing to keep in mind, but that's one thing I'm keeping my eye on. In regards to other positions, Jeremiah's asked in the chat about Joey O'Brien. He's a guy that Clemson has recently been really, really picking up steam with. He has a previous relationship with Tom Allen, being from Pennsylvania. One of I believe he's a top 50 player at the safety position. Clemson has done a really good job, and as that relationship has started to pick up steam, he has elevated them higher and higher on his board. I think Clemson will be in his top group when it's all said and done, and be potentially, who knows, this is still ongoing, but potentially in a position where they legitimately have a shot to land him. So you land him, and then he also mentions Polo Anderson, who I've talked about a lot on this channel, a guy that feels really, really strongly. I feel really, really strongly ends up a Clemson Tiger. when it's all said and done. You pair him, those two together. This safety class would be one of the better ones that you've had, especially from just a pure blue chip talent standpoint. These are two of the best safeties in the country that you would be
Yeah.
adding to your class. Um, so, props to this defensive coaching staff, Mickey Kahn, especially. Um, you know, he hasn't had a reputation of landing some of the top of the line safety prospects in the country. He's had a few of them here or there. Ricardo Jones recently was a pretty highly regarded safety, but really, Mickey Kahn is he's made his bread and butter by identifying some of the under recruited, talented, but not necessarily like the freak athlete type of safeties like the RJ Mickens of the world.
Right.
And so, you pair, he starts landing, top 50 safety prospects. Now we're talking about a different conversation as far as what that means for Clemson secondary. So,
Absolutely.
To Jeremiah's point, he also asked about taking another cornerback. Kerry Adams is a guy that we've mentioned a couple of times on here that Clemson has been, really, really hard after. He just recently announced that he will not be taking his official visit on May 30th to USC. Does that mean he's opening us up a spot for that official visit weekend on May 30th for Clemson?
Hey,
maybe.
Who knows?
So, that's certainly a favorable development regardless for Clemson. And, they're certainly going to try to take advantage of that because they do view him as a guy that they will he is certainly a take. I mean, he's the top 100-ish cornerback. You'll take a guy with his talent level, 10 times out of 10. So
no doubt about it.
Yeah, this secondary group, I think they've done a phenomenal job as far as just putting it together. I mean, you already have Shavar Young in the boat, and already blanking on his name, kid from Texas. It'll come to me when I keep talking, and then I won't be able to go back to it. Marcel Gibson. Yeah, there we go. So, you already have a strong foundation in the secondary. But if you add a guy, you add a Polo Anderson, you add a Joey O'Brien, you add a Kerry Adams. Now you're talking about one of the best secondary classes in the country. So, really, really good work by this staff, and we'll continue to monitor that as we get closer and closer to that May official visit weekend because it's going to be loaded.
Yeah, absolutely. Really looking forward to that May 30th official visit weekend. It's going to be huge, and it'll definitely do a lot with, just kind of tying up some stuff in this recruiting class. And then, what Clemson likes to do as well is bring on these guys that are already verbal commits, just to kind of renew their commitment, if you will, just to get back in Clemson and back around all the players that committed with them and that will eventually be teammates of theirs. So that's always a good thing to kind of re-solidify some of those verbal commits that you got back on the elite retreat weekend. So that'll be good as well. Can't wait to see the fruits of that because typically that's a pretty big weekend for the Clemson Tigers and has always produced some really good results for us on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and one more. On the secondary recruiting front, I haven't really mentioned him a ton because that recruitment has kind of felt like it's been trending away from Clemson. Samari Matthews, certainly one of the top defensive backs on the board, arguably the top defensive back on the board. Clemson has at different points held some momentum in his recruitment, but that one is kind of feeling like it's one where he's being influenced by other factors. I think Florida State is certainly in it for him. South Carolina, Texas is the team that's been really trending as of late. I think Clemson will, be in that. I think Clemson is in that top group, but I don't expect at the end of the day for him to pick Clemson. So that's if you're wondering why I haven't mentioned him all that much, it's because I don't feel good about where that thing is trending right now. So. Yes. Things can change. There's still some time. I know he's set to commit in August, so you've got quite some time.
Well, plenty of time.
Things can change, but it feels like he's being kind of pulled in a lot of different directions. And when you have a recruit like that, Clemson has not fared well with those types of recruitments in the past, where it's back and forth. This team holds momentum at one point, then another team holds momentum. It just, those type of recruitments Clemson has just not done well in. So not really going to spend too much time on him unless something changes.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's kind of our quick wrap up on what's going on as far as Clemson recruiting, the 2026 recruiting class. Looking forward to that May 30th official visit weekend, and we will keep you guys posted as more information comes out and as news comes out with the recruiting cycle